I really wrestled with making this video. Half of me didn't want to do it. I'm not political. I keep a distance from politics on purpose, and as much as I have tried not to conflate politics with religious belief, I'm not sure in this day and age in our country that conflation can be avoided. And here we come up against the murder of professed Christian Charlie Kirk and everything that's transpired since then. I'm horrified by all of it from all sides. If I were an alien anthropologist and I came here to study American culture and ideologies, I'm not sure what I'd conclude apart from we're all a mess. And I recognize that my little video here on my tiny little channel is just contributing to all of the noise. I'm a very small part of it. I have no solutions necessarily to offer in today's video, only more questions and a request. What convinced me to make this video today is you guys, the ones who have so graciously supported my work around religious trauma, the ones who tell me how important this message is and how much it's needed, and to please keep going. So my message today is about where we're heading in the country around meaningful and productive dialogue about, of course, religious trauma. Because if the past several days have shown me anything, it's that as a nation, I believe there's now less tolerance for helpful conversation around religious trauma. There's more digging in, there's more defending dogma, there's more false dichotomies. The rhetoric has become more abrasive, which leaves less room for nuance, respect, consideration, complexity, and compassion. So today, I'm speaking on behalf of all those who have survived Christian religious trauma and those going through it right now. And believe it or not, there are a lot of us, millions in America and around the globe. My fear is that this very important topic and discussion will get buried by the avalanche of acerbic rhetoric, name-calling, doubling down, and battle cries from, well, both sides. The sad thing is, though I am trying to invite productive discussion, I'm certain I'll be cast off by some as a pot-stirring troublemaker. And that's where we are as a nation. At least that's where the media has convinced me we're at, and I should probably know better as one who has studied the media and mass communication, not to buy into all the hype. But if we keep telling ourselves certain narratives, eventually we'll believe them, no matter what they are. Oh, and by the way, if you all see this video, it means the rapture hasn't happened, at least not yet today, as so many have predicted by September 24th, which again, all this is so traumatizing for kids who are terrified by rapture doctrine. But this is where we are as humanity. We just can't get off this damn hamster wheel. And maybe I'm helping to keep it spinning. Who knows? If y'all are new here, hello, I'm H.G.Roberts, deconverted Christian after 25 years and author of On Monsters and Phantoms. And here, like I just said, we talk about religious trauma and how the Bible itself ties us up in knots, leads to confusion, anxiety, fear, doubt, depression, emotional oblivion, mental paralysis, and ultimately, of course, trauma. And very few on the conservative right will agree with what I just said there. I have a master's degree in mass communication, so I'm specifically interested in the messages the Bible communicates to us today, the cognitive filters in our minds that we use to interpret those messages, and finally, the harmful impact those messages have on ourself and our worldview. So when I hear Charlie Kirk speak, yeah, I bristle, but for better or for worse, I also stop and say, what is he actually trying to say? Does he have a valid point about DEI, about statistics on racial violence, about the motives of the LGBTQ community, and on and on? Is he sharing any perspectives I haven't considered? And yet, as I've watched clip after clip with context and without, and analyzed debate after debate, I struggle to find areas where I agree with Kirk and where he allowed for nuance and a mutual, thoughtful, well-researched, well-reasoned, and equal exchange of valid perspective. I find myself sounding out rebuttal arguments to many things he's said. I think, despite his reported short tenure in higher education, he was well educated, and that's fine if you disagree with me. I mean, you couldn't do what he did without some intellectual savvy, no matter how distorted. He was also a gifted public speaker, and he was passionate about his beliefs, like I am about mine. He and I are no different in that way. We've each built platforms where we can share our perspectives and messages. We're each trying to convince others of our arguments and rally them to our side. And that's the value of the First Amendment. That's what makes our country so great, this marketplace of ideas that we should be able to peacefully contribute to and share. I'm benefiting from the same freedoms and opportunities Kirk did. Many qualify what Kirk said as hate speech, but some could argue I'm spewing hate speech here on my channel when I talk about the Christian God being an evil monster. Yet I advocate for a thoughtful and peaceful exchange of ideas, and many believe Kirk also did the same. Of course, many don't. I know we're a divided nation on these issues, and that sucks. It demonstrates, in my view, a lack of national maturity. And look, I could say a million things here, but I want to hone today's video to something more specific. And that is this. I've imagined sitting across from someone like Charlie Kirk or Mark Driscoll and trying to have an honest, educated, and researched conversation about religious trauma, trying to connect the dots for them between adverse and traumatic childhood experiences, personal temperament, cognitive filters, and personality, basically walking them through this chart I've created. And honestly, feeling like I'd be shamed and laughed out of the room, certainly not taken seriously. I'd be derided as a false former Christian, one who didn't allow the grace of God through his Holy Spirit to heal and redeem me, which is all untrue, of course. I did experience his grace and healing. I sense I'd be accused of crying victim now, despite all the evidence I present that religious trauma is real, that it's documented in the scientific literature. We understand why it happens. We understand the psychology and the cognitive brain functions that help it form and take root in a person's life. We understand its affects and its impact. We have trauma-informed therapeutic modalities in place to treat it like we do for other forms of trauma, because at the end of the day, trauma is trauma. What I don't believe I'd get is even the slightest bit of understanding, or to use Charlie's words, sympathy or compassion. I certainly wouldn't get empathy, because I doubt that either Charlie or Mark were raped by another man as children, beaten to a pulp, then introduced to a wrathful God of punishment right on the heels of all of that, shaping their worldview of what I believe Scripture actually does declare about the Christian God being a monster, despite some cherry-picked passages Christians use to support that their God is a God of perfect love. Charlie's right about empathy, sort of, at least in what I believe are accurate reflections of what he said. Sometimes it is impossible to truly know what another is feeling and experiencing, and it's a disservice and potentially insulting to say to someone that you know what they're going through when actually you couldn't possibly know, which is why Charlie and others might not be able to generate even the slightest bit of empathy for the sexually abused, because they were never raped repeatedly by another man when they were 7 and then threatened with death if they ever told anyone. But you know what? Sometimes it is possible to know what another has experienced and felt because you've walked in their shoes. Empathy should only be applied to where it authentically fits, but it does sometimes fit, and it should be applied. We should not just discard it as a meaningless, new age, made-up term. And guess what? I know what it's like to be a right-wing conservative Christian who will go to great lengths to defend the God of the Bible. I did that for 25 years. I wonder if I didn't get out of Christianity 12 years ago, if I'd be cheering the country on as a Christian nationalist today. I certainly fit the mold. So when I make these videos, you will often hear me say, I get why Christians would do or say that. I did the exact same thing for the exact same reasons. I do believe I have the right to make the arguments I do about the harm and toxicity of Christian belief because I've been there and done that as an evangelical fundamentalist Christian. I know what it sounds like, and I know what it feels like. I have interviewed trans people who were sexually abused when they were children. Whether or not I agree with someone who is trans isn't the issue. Empathy allows me to understand their journey and perspective because I know what it's like to be molested as a child, and I know what that creates psychologically, emotionally, and physiologically for a lifetime. Empathy causes me to lean in and listen to someone's story, to not pass judgment, and to contend with a bunch of variables not easily brushed aside by dogma. And yes, I willingly admit that I pass judgment on some Christians. I judge as unfair and close-minded those who are unwilling to listen or consider the facts. I also submit that they do real harm to some people, so I call out the irresponsible, unexamined danger they create. But I can still empathize with their positions. Hence why my channel is primarily one of education. I get what it takes to actually open someone's eyes to see things differently. Religious trauma, this very catastrophic event in my life, caused me to open mine. Sometimes it takes a catastrophic event of some kind to shift our perspectives, but still, my hope is that we can avoid all the catastrophe and open our eyes through education and respectful dialogue. I'm pretty confident that with people like Kirk or Driscoll, I wouldn't get to have a fruitful discussion, that I wouldn't even be able to make my case and present the overwhelming evidence. Based on everything I've seen, I'd be shut down with quick quips and Bible cliches that do not take into account a well-researched perspective, a reasoned approach, nor a human's real experiences. I'd be bullied and gaslit into thinking I was wrong, deceived, misguided, or just simply a wilting victim who was unable to get past some bad stuff that happened to me as a kid, and I need to get over it because bad stuff happened to all of us as kids. I certainly feel that the conservative right, and I want to be careful not to paint with too broad a brush here, would not honestly and critically entertain the mountain of scientific evidence and personal stories I'd bring to the table, even when I would stipulate up front that not everyone experiences religious trauma from Christianity, and that Christianity does benefit some. That the ones it does legitimately traumatize would be pushed off to the margins and dismissed is both abominable and unfair. It's also dangerous. All I'm asking for is consideration that there's something to this that the conservative religious right should acknowledge. I'm not asking them to abandon their beliefs and take my side. I'm not asking them to renounce their God and deconvert. All I'm asking for is a declaration from Christians that Christianity can and does create harm for many people, and we can prove how and why. It has nothing to do with a spiritual realm mucking things up. If that's your argument, Christians, you have bigger problems to sort through. Do you know who I'd really want to talk to right now or in the near future? Erica Kirk, a mother of 2 young children. Erica, you'll never see this video, and I don't want you to entertain anything I'm about to say, at least not for a long while. You need to grieve, and my heart breaks for you as a wife and a mother. I am so wordlessly sorry for your loss and what you've endured publicly and privately, no matter where we stand on the issues. Nobody should have to go through this. Of course, I condemn the violence, and you have my absolute sincere condolences. And I hope that your 2 young children are not traumatized by what they've witnessed or heard. And I know they're very young, but this is the kind of event that stays with a young mind and influences it for better or for worse down the road. I say this from experience. I hope your children avoid that. I really do. I hope they don't question why a good and loving God would allow their dad to be murdered in broad daylight. I hope they don't try to reconcile that with what the scriptures show about God protecting people from harm, how he encamps around them to protect them here on earth. That will create some cognitive dissonance for them. I hope that when congregants give a praise testimony about how God provided the $200 they needed to pay the electric bill, they don't ask, why couldn't God have made the bullet move 2 inches to the right and miss? I'm not trying to be crass here. These are the very real moral and cognitive dilemmas young minds, at least some of them, have to work through. I know that you will tell them about how we live in a fallen world full of sin and that Jesus will make it all better when he returns and that sometimes God works in mysterious ways and who can know his plans. But my father said the same things to me. That kind of teaching is no guarantee that your children won't be damaged by this. There are some realities that scriptural contradictions cannot overcome. But as I said, I hope they are not traumatized by this. So, here's my question for you, Erica. And you know what? Let's actually take Erica out of this. It's a question for all conservative, fundamental Christians. What if one of your children, your son, God forbid, is raped repeatedly by another man when he's 7, in the shadows, without you knowing, under your watch? I know in a debate that Kirk said if his daughter were raped, he'd insist that she'd have the baby. But what about his daughter? What if she feels differently? What becomes of her? It's hard to say. But getting back to your son being molested by another man, what if that experience creates cognitive filters that allow him to one day see your God as vicious and cruel, a punishing, unprotecting, and barbaric savage as he's depicted in the Old Testament and even parts of the New, despite your teaching him that God is good and love and just, and we're all just victims of sin in this fallen world. Again, like my father taught me when I was growing up. Same messages, same scriptures. What if that causes your son, as he ages into an adult, to become traumatized by this God? Can't happen, you say? That's what I thought for 25 years as a Christian, and what my father would have said. What if then your son needs to question and challenge everything you tried to teach him when he was young, once he actually had the means to investigate and examine all the evidence and science on his own? What if, like me, he concluded very honestly through years of agonizing reflection, knowing how much he'd disappoint you, that he couldn't embrace what he now sees as a toxic religion? Christians, where would your compassion be in that moment? Would you actually have any? Would it be phrased as simply as, I'm so sorry about what happened to you, but Christ is the ultimate healer, the one who can ultimately restore you if you just put your faith and trust in him? Would it sound like, I pray that God would deliver you from the evil spirits that are deceiving you? Would it sound like God separates the wheat from the chaff, and in the end times, even the elect will fall away? I'm assuming it would be a variation of all those, perhaps. What it wouldn't sound like is, you're right, son. Though I believe Jesus is good and heals, I know that many are harmed by this religion and belief system. I know it has contradictions and confusing incongruencies that can lead one down dark paths, and I know why. I've seen the science and the literature. Some guy named H.G.Roberts wouldn't shut up about it. Son, I wish Jesus healed everyone like we claim he does, but he obviously doesn't. So we Christians need to be careful how we share our beliefs, how we attempt to prioritize them in our country's governance, education, and policies, and we need to protect children from what could ultimately be dangerous indoctrination. Look, all I'm asking for is fairness. Fairness driven by empathy and compassion. If we lose our empathy and compassion, which it seems we're now teetering down that slippery slope like never before, then we are what we fear most, a divided, dualistic, accusing, and condemning nation, unable to reconcile, unable to respect, unable to dialogue. That's not the America I want, and hopefully it's not the America you want either. The great irony here is that Charlie Kirk, according to some, tried to inspire dialogue and discussion. However, his harmful legacy is that he only squelched it. I certainly don't believe I now live in an America that is more receptive to my religious trauma messages. Quite the contrary. Okay. That will hopefully be as political as I ever get here, and the only reason I went here is because I will fight to ensure we don't lose the ability to have a respectful discourse about religious trauma amid all this name-calling and divisive rhetoric. Thanks for being here, you guys. I really appreciate it. If you want to support this channel, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss my next conversation starter. But a way to support the channel financially, since I don't have Patreons or sponsors, is to do what many others have done and purchase on Monsters and Phantoms. This is my memoir about severe religious trauma and deconversion from Christianity. And if you're up for it, leave me a review. It's a raw and honest look into the diabolically harmful mind games Christianity plays with us. The link to it on Amazon is below. I appreciate that. If you do buy it, let me know via email in addition to a comment so I can publicly thank you in my next video. It would be my pleasure to do that. I try to put out a new video each Wednesday and Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, where we take a deep dive into what religious trauma is, how it forms, in whom it's most likely to form, and what we can do about it if it does form. If you'd like me to cover a specific topic, let me know in the comments. And if you're new here and curious about religious trauma, welcome to the channel. If you think you may be suffering from it, explore the channel to see what other topics I've covered and what resources are available to you. And until next time, let's continue to catalyze a conversation together about religious trauma, to let those who suffer from it know that there's hope, and to let those who dismiss it know that it's real.